So we're going to talk about a lot of different things, but we're not going to try to get in too much depth with it, but just hit the surface of all the things so we have a good basis, a good foundation. Then that way you can, if you got the basic information, then it's easy to search and figure out where to get that more in-depth information from. Now, in your big manual is pretty much all the K-State turf publications. That is a great resource to go to when it comes to stuff. But here in the presentation is would be, I would say, your outline. It's going to give you some specifics of certain things, some guidelines, recommendation-wise. But if you got to get in a little bit more depth, that manual is a good source to go to. And also the website, ksuturf.com. It's going to have all publications. It's going to have everything from jobs. It's going to have a link to the blog. It's going to have a lot of resources there. When you become, volunteering and people are asking you questions, it's another good resource to send them out to. Turf is a part of the landscape. It is not the landscape. I like to think it as the canvas that an artist paints on. It's your background colors is the one that you got to have to then you build your landscape beds in, your flower beds, your trees. You have to have recreational areas for kids and animals. Not to mention the benefits of just having turf in your lawn. It filters air and water, reduces erosion. Sometimes I've seen on Facebook, these guys have cut these little tubes and they put turf in one, dirt in one, and mulch in another one and pour dirty water through it. And the clean water comes out of the turf tube, but it's dirty water that comes out of the other one. So it really filters the sediments and erosion. If any of you actually got up in the morning and looked outside of your house and said, man, that's some pretty brown dead grass, not only turf, but a healthy, vibrant, growing landscape promotes mental healing and health. That's why we have common areas around corporate buildings where people can go outside when they're stressed at work and kind of relax a little bit. Hospitals, parks. It really does make people happy when things are green and growing. I feel like, I haven't been here in Kansas very long. I've been in the Southeast most of my life, here for 4 years. I get that January, February, blah. I'm like, come on, start greening up, I remember when I used to come home from work, I could sit outside and look at the flowers and just hang out for a little bit. So it does do that. And that's something that we can't quantify. That's a personal emotion, which I think goes a long way when it comes to the landscape. We'll talk about air conditioning and CO2 on the next slide. Noise abatement, if you have concert halls, they're not in parking lots typically. Amphitheaters are typically where grass has been grown. And so you're sitting on a hill with grass because it's good acoustics with it. It absorbs a lot of that heat. Glare reduction on the side of the roads. We're driving through the Flint Hills. A lot of those rocks are very shiny when the light hits it. Turf kind of grows up above it, reduces the glare, and then is a safety precaution now from the road. But these are one of my two favorite things that are really impactful when it comes to the use of turf. One block, about 8 houses, equals 70 tons of air conditioning. Your house is roughly 3 to 4 tons of air conditioner unit that you have. So that turf is able to absorb heat and cool the ambient air around it. Not only is it cooling the air around your house, now your air conditioner is not pumping, nonstop to try to keep the inside of your house cold, which is now saving you money. So having a healthy, maintained lawn, even though you say, well, I got to spend money on a little bit of fertilizer, on mowing or this and that, that is drastically less than what it's going to be for the power bill to keep your house cool. This is really, really important because anybody who's ever used one of those infrared lasers, you can point them and it'll tell you the temperature of things. Well, if you ever have one, for some reason, I have one in my truck because I'm a turf nerd. If you point it at bare ground and then you point it at maybe concrete and you point it at turf, turf's going to be 10 to 15 degrees cooler than exposed soil, just soil by itself. And then if you have rock or pavement, then now you're looking at 20 to 25 degrees difference. So think about that with your rock beds around your house. If you have 3 feet of rock and not mulch, you're going to have 10 degrees hotter temperatures just coming off your soil right next to your house. And that's another, with turf too, it's important that your turf is healthy and maintained, because if you have poor turf, then the air around your house is going to be a lot warmer as well. Working with the guys with the solar panels, that is the biggest issue that we had with them is the idea. I get up there and I talk to them. I said, what's it matter what it looks like? You just got to keep it low, just so you don't have to, so it doesn't get in front of those solar panels. They said, well, every degree in temperature change around that solar panel decreases the efficiency of it collecting energy from the sun. So bare soil and not having turf around it or putting mulch around these things decreases the efficiency of that solar panel to collect energy, which then why would you have a solar panel if it's not going to efficiently collect the energy from the sun? So that's a real important when it comes to turf. And then just like any plant that we grow, we take in CO2 and make oxygen. We hate turf because we have to mow it all the time. But because it's mowing, or we have to mow it all the time, it's because it's growing all the time. Because it's growing all the time, it's very efficient in taking CO2 and making oxygen. So just a 50 by 100 foot area, which would probably be roughly about the size of this room, is going to make enough oxygen for a family of 4 every day. That's a lot of oxygen. Trees, shrubs, flowers, they also do the same thing, but these are very efficient plants that are able to take in the CO2 and produce oxygen. So there's the benefits of turf. Now here's your drawback. You ready? In Kansas, we are in the northwestern part of the transition zone, okay? The transition zone says it has really warm summers and really cool winters. It is hard to grow grass in Kansas. It is probably one of the most difficult areas in the United States to grow grass. It's too hot in the summer for fescues, and it's too cold in the winter for like your Bermudas or your Zoysiagrasses. I say you can never grow a turf really well. You just grow both of them very poorly, I mean, that's how it is. But luckily, you guys have someone that grew up also in the transition zone as a turf specialist. Big difference between here and Kansas is I believe North Carolina has 2 more seasons than Kansas does, spring and fall. There's a lot of temperature fluctuations as we're seeing currently right now, 80 degrees yesterday, 29 degrees tomorrow night, where in some other parts of the transition zone, they're more gradual changes. So that's why it makes it difficult. We're also looking here at about 9 inches in Goodland, a year of rain, to about 30 inches in Kansas City. So just within the state, there's drastic weather differences, not only within the transition zone. So with that, like I said, it's hard to grow both turf grass species. So we have 2 different main types of grasses, warm season grasses and cool season grasses. We're real scientific here. Warm season grasses grow mainly when? Summer. And cool season grasses mainly grow spring and fall. This is just a growth diagram of that. If you know this, you can manage turf. That's what I always tell people, because every time you want to do something to one of these grasses, it's in the time that it's growing. You don't want to feed it when it's not growing, type of thing with fertility. You don't want to mow it if it's not growing. If you want to grow new stuff, you want to grow it during the time of the year that it's going to maximize its growth. So for warm season, it's in the summer, indicated by the red line, and for the cool seasons, indicated by the blue line, which is the spring and the fall. Now, this graph was developed, I think, back when turfgrass actually started as a science, when they became degrees. They did a lot of research, and they looked at growth rates. This was done on unirrigated turf. 90% of the turf now is irrigated. We're seeing different growth patterns with these grasses now because they're growing longer into the fall or greening up earlier in the spring, or during the summertime, it's high temperatures, and if we're watering it, there's nitrogen mineralization going on in the soil, so then you get more growth in the summer than we think. So that's one thing that we've been looking at with the other universities is what's the real growth rate on a normal lawn with the species that we have now that's maintained as a lawn, not just put out there just to grow. But it's not much drastically different than this. So if you know this, you know how to grow turf grass. On the leaf blade, there's going to be hairs or there's not going to be hairs. If there's hairs, it's a warm season grass. It's an easy way to identify it. If there's no hairs, it could be either. So if you pick up a grass, and the take-home point with this is if there's hairs and stuff on the leaf, as you can see kind of with this one, it is a warm season grass. So you know it's only going to grow in the summertime. It's not really going to grow in the spring or the fall. Growth habit, we are going to go over. Vernation, I'm not going to go over it. It's just how that leaf folds around the stem. They're either rolled or folded. And to be honest with you, you can't see it unless you have a magnifying glass. And unless we're going and really identifying, you know, within all these species, just know that there's different kind of vernations, which might be important if someone brings in a sample and says, what type of grass is this? There's no hairs on it, so it could be a warm or cool season. Then when you're looking through your key or whatever of your grasses, it would say, is it rolled or folded? Then you can look at that. Now texture, I will talk about that because coarse texture just means wide leaves. Fine texture means, you know, not wide leaf. Typically in turf, the customer likes finely textured grasses, not coarse textured grasses. Anybody ever been to Florida? Okay. If you haven't, have you seen Florida on the map? Okay. Well, down in Florida, they have a grass called St. Augustine grass. And it is the widest, thickest grass I've ever seen. It's very warm, drought tolerant, heat tolerant, but it's not as attractive as maybe as a fescue or another grass like that. Now, the older fescues are typically wider leaves. The newer ones are thinner leaves. But that's all we need to say about that. All right. So going back to growth habit. It's important to know the different growth habits of the grasses because some you're going to seed. Some, if it dies out, you may not need to reseed it because it can grow back from the other vegetative parts of the plant. So the first one is called a stolon. So a seed grows and makes that one plant right in the middle. Once it gets mature, that plant says, I need to grow more. So it can produce an above ground stem called a stolon and then produce another plant. And then that plant can produce more stolons and it spreads on top of the ground. Now, the opposite of that is a rhizome. These are the sneaky ones. Sorry about that. This is a below ground stem. So this is the one why people don't like Bermudagrass, because you spray it and you think it's all gone, but there's some stuff up underneath the soil still there for it to come back. Bluegrass also has this, which is why sometimes we mix bluegrass with fescue, because if our fescue dies, it doesn't have rhizomes or stolon, but our bluegrass does, so it can fill in maybe some of those areas if maybe we had heat or drought in the summertime, you know, kill some of it. So stolon is above ground, rhizome is below ground. And then the last one is called bunch type. Tall fescue is a bunch type. It means one seed, one plant. That plant dies, it's not coming back from a rhizome or a stolon. That's why our maintenance plans when it comes to fescue, we typically have to reseed if we lost a lot due to, you know, the heat in the summer or the cold in the wintertime. But bunch type, tall fescue. So those are the other ones. Now I did talk about the presence of hairs, the growth habit, the vernation. There are some other ones like ligules, auricles, collars, leaf tips. We're not going to go into any of that. I think it's super boring and it's not worth wasting a lot of time for because we got other information to talk about. What we're going to do is we're going to go over the two different types of grasses. We're going to go over the cool season grasses first. We're going to go over the warm season grasses, just kind of general overview of them. Once we do that, we're going to talk about mowing. We're going to talk about watering. We're going to talk about fertilization. And then seeding will wrap up the morning session. Now, with every grass, there's not a perfect grass, I'll tell you. There's not one out there that's going to fit everybody's scenario perfect. There's not one that's going to be shade tolerant and traffic tolerant. Everything that you want, there's probably something with that grass that doesn't work quite right. So what we need to do, and also your lawn is different than your lawn, that's different than yours, it's different than, could be different than your neighbor's. So it's kind of site specific. So what we want to do is find the benefits, the attributes, and know which one is good for each grass, what the pros and cons are for each type of grass, and then that way you know what to recommend for a certain situation. So that's kind of what we'll go over. So cool season grasses, there's a bunch of them that grow in Kansas. Tall fescue, Kentucky bluegrass, perennial ryegrass, creeping bentgrass, and fine leaf fescues. We're mainly going to talk about today tall fescue, Kentucky bluegrass, and a little bit about fine leaf fescues. Just a little bit, because you'll see some of these in some of your seed mixtures because it's very shade tolerant. Perennial ryegrass grows really well in the fall in Kansas and grows really well in the winter in Kansas, but does not grow well at all during the summer. It has high water requirements. Therefore, we typically don't see it as much used in the state of Kansas. A lot of bags of seed will have perennial ryegrass in it, so beware. Make sure you look at the label. Perennial ryegrass is one of those grasses that you could throw it down on this floor, put a little water to it, and it will grow. Now, about 6 days after it grows, it's probably going to die because it has no roots on it, or lack of water. But it makes us all think that growing turf is easy, So just beware when you see perennial ryegrass. It's okay to have a little bit sometimes, but not an entire perennial ryegrass lawn. Creeping bentgrass. Has anybody ever heard of that? Golfer, huh? All right. Creeping bentgrass is not a grass for home lawns. Now, up north it is, because it is super cold tolerant. There's not as much drought, not as much heat in the summer. But here in Kansas, it's typically used for golf course putting greens, and they're mown at a fraction of an inch. So therefore, we're not going to go mow our yard at a fraction of an inch, and we're not going to put all that time and effort, high fertility, and water into it, so we don't use it as a home lawn. So our main two are tall fescue and Kentucky bluegrass. We're going to start with tall fescue. Well, we kind of already went over that, so I won't hit it. Grows best during the spring and fall. Summer is difficult. I like to say may go dormant in the summer during the heat and the drought. That's if you have correct watering practices. There is a fine line between dormant and dead, okay? I will tell you that. If you get out there and in the springtime you've trained your grass with correct watering, yes, it may go dormant, turn a little purple, a little bit of water, a little bit of fertility. When it cools back down, it may pop back out of it. Now, if we have a couple 100-degree days in a row, soil's been dry, we can't get water down to the roots, it may be dead after that. All right, so the first one is tall fescue. Tall fescue is a bunch type, one seed, one plant. It's very rigid leaves, okay? So it's very stiff leaves compared to the other ones. Now, there's newer ones called turf type tall fescues that are not as rigid, but tall fescue makes the best thumb whistle, okay? If you have a competition to make thumb whistles, identify it's tall fescue because it makes the best one. Its leaves are going to be very pointed. And when I say that, sometimes people are like, well, duh, all leaves are pointed on grass. They're all long and slender. Well, this one is more like a sword. It's fat at the base, and it gradually comes to a tip. That's how you're going to tell the difference between Kentucky bluegrass and tall fescue, is just by the leaf tip and the way it looks. The seeds are quite large in tall fescue, and it's very, very good, well-adapted turf for Kansas. This is tall fescue in a home lawn situation. You can see how it fills in really well. It's thick. It's really nice. This actually has a little bit of iron deficiency into it, as you can see kind of in some of the yellowing of the leaves, but it is a very, very good grass, cool season grass for Kansas. Best adapted for Kansas. The seed germinates quickly, 3 to 5 days in perfect condition. Have you ever seen perfect conditions? All right. So in this presentation, we're going to have a lot of numbers. These numbers meant someone put it in the perfect optimal day temperature, night temperature, light temperature, no shade, for a certain amount of hours, perfect amount of dark temperature, ideal conditions, and they found out 3 to 5 days it germinates. In real world situations, a lot of these numbers are going to be extended because we're not going to have perfect conditions. What we want to do is we want to optimize, for example, for seeding. When is the environment going to be roughly that perfect condition time zone, and then try and seed during that time. It is coarse bladed. Some of the newer cultivars are finer than the older ones. These are called turf type tall fescues. The older variety that I mentioned is K31. It's the one you can get at any feed and seed store. It has a big K31 on it. It's usually $50 for 50 pounds. It is very deep rooted, but it is not really well for a home lawn due to the lack of disease resistance it has. It grows seed heads really tall. If this is like a back 40 area, works perfect for it, but the fine leaf fescues have been developed for better disease tolerant, heat tolerant, drought tolerant, cold tolerance, traffic tolerance, whatever it should be. Those typically are better. And they're a darker green. The K31, which is the older one used for typically low maintenance lawns, is a lighter green color, less dense, very bunchy type. It really looks like a pasture grass. It's kind of the relation of it is compared to the other one. Now, when I say newer, 10, 15 years is newer. In turf development, and when they come to make grass species, someone had already started this a long time ago, and we have to test it for years after years after years. How do you test disease tolerance overnight? You can't. You have to put it in the environment at many locations and put the disease out on it over the years to see if it actually has disease tolerance. Same thing with drought tolerance. You can't just grow it and then turn the water off to it, and if it grows for 3 days, you say it's more drought tolerant. It takes time to do it. So a lot of these varieties that are out there, they're 10 to 15 years old, but they're considered new to the market. There's been a lot of previous research and stuff done to them. Some people call them fine leaf fescues, but they're not fine leaf fescues. They're called turf type tall fescue because fine leaf fescues are their own separate species of fescue. So don't get them confused with that. It is typically the best choice for shade. Zoysiagrass is the best shade tolerant of the warm season grasses, but tall fescue is the best shade tolerant of the cool season grasses. No grass likes the shade. All turf grass likes the sun. Tall fescue can just tolerate the shade better than some of the other ones can. What's going on here? The turf around this tree is not shaded. Up here is shaded. So why is there a difference in health of this grass right around this tree compared to out here? Shade from a tree is also filtered shade, but it is also competing for grass or for nutrients and for water as well. That's why it's tough growing turf under trees, not necessarily because of the shade, but it's also that tree is a stronger element of taking water away from the little weak roots of grass. There's a difference between shade from a tree and the shade from a building. Buildings don't grow. So it's not competing for water and it's not competing for nutrients. The only limiting factor there is the actual shade itself. So you can typically grow stuff beside a building better than you can underneath a tree just due to that, the influence of water. So now what about fine leaf fescues? There are a bunch of what's called true fine leaf fescues. They're chewing fescue, hard, creeping, and sheeps. These are okay to have in your bag of seed, especially if you have shade, but you don't want to have 100% fine leaf fescue blend. They're super fine. They look more like a needle than an actual grass blade. They're just not as heat tolerant as some of the other fescues that are out there. They have excellent shade tolerance, so that's why you would want to mix them in with the other ones. But they have poor heat tolerance, like I said. So if it's out in the middle of the sun, it's not going to make it. But if it's in that seed blend that you seeded underneath your shade and in the sun, you're going to have some stick around in that shade. To the naked eye, you won't be able to tell the difference, but now you have a uniform stand across your home lawn. You don't want to just go in and say, I'm going to plant fine leaf fescues only underneath my tree and then my turf type tall fescues in the sun. You know, and like I said, not to be used in Kansas without putting it with the other type turf type tall fescues. So that's kind of the drive home point with that. Now that's the fescues. Now Kentucky bluegrass is another cool season grass species that we commonly grow in Kansas. It's neat because it has a rhizome. So this grass is not one seed, one plant, but it can grow rhizomes. Now these are not the crazy strong steroid rhizomes like Bermudagrass, but they will grow and fill back in. This is why a lot of times we see a mixture of fescue. It might have 2 types of fescue in it, 1 type of Kentucky bluegrass, maybe a little bit of fine fescue in it. And it's because, say you have a little, something dies in the middle of the summertime due to heat or drought, this can come back because it has some underground storage. And say if this plant seed made 10 plants, 9 of them died in the summer, you still have 1 plant for it to grow back from. And it will spread where the fescue won't do that. It'll just stay and clump in that one spot. It is finer textured. Note that the seed size is really, really small compared to fescue. When we typically buy seed and say it's blended bluegrass fescue, it's a 90-10. That's what they call it. 90% fescue, 10% bluegrass. That's on a volume to volume basis. So they put 9 scoops of this in and 1 scoop of this. On the seed number amount, you're about 50-50. 50% actual number of seeds of fescue to 50% number of seeds of bluegrass. Because that seed is so small, there's more seeds in an area than it is when it comes to fescue. Because the fescue seeds are bigger, they take up more space. But that's okay. Now, the easiest way to tell the difference, remember how I said tall fescue has to come straight to a point? This is our very scientific word for this. It's a boat-shaped leaf tip. It's like the front of a boat. So the leaves are real parallel, the edges of them are, and then they kind of round off to a point. Some of them may even have a little notch in the top, but most of them just kind of round off. And they'll even cup a little bit too, as you can see on the leaf tip of the one on the left. This is another one. This one is commonly used in more areas like athletic fields because you got guys with cleats beating it up and tearing it up. So within the season, it can kind of grow back without reseeding that area. More in western Kansas, I see Kentucky bluegrass compared to central and eastern Kansas, just because of the environment out there is typically a little bit cooler. So, like I said, it makes it good lawn though. Slower germinating. Fescue is like a 3 to 5 day germination. This is like 10 to 14. And even after it germinates, it's going to be slow. So that first year you seed this, it might not grow very tall, might not grow a lot. You predominantly see maybe the fescue in that blend, but then maybe the next year it's going to grow a little bit better. I wouldn't say it's 100% what I call a sleep, creep, and leap, but it is kind of like a sleep, creep, and leap. That first year it kind of sleeps a little bit, grows and hangs out. The next, by towards the end of that season, you're starting to creep. The next year it starts leaping. It's got a good foundation. It's got a lot of rhizomes on it, so then it can just leap in it. It is less heat tolerant than fescue, but it will go dormant than fescue in the summertime. And it has the ability to come back because it has those rhizomes as well. So even though it's less heat tolerant, it will go dormant, and you have a higher probability of coming back. So a little water and a little fertilizer can really help this come back. That's why a lot of people, when water gets tight, they say, whatever, I got bluegrass, I'll just let it go dormant in the summertime. Whenever the water restrictions go away, I'll water it again. But it really depends on how long your water restrictions are, how hot it is at the time, type of thing. Now, we'll talk about good watering practices to ensure it's more dormant than dead, so to say, when we get to the watering. It's kind of like training for a marathon. And so I'll leave it at that because we'll get it to when it's the water. This is a picture of an athletic field in Wamego that's 100% bluegrass. You can see that it performs really well. He puts bluegrass on his field just for the fact that he's got kids running around on it every day of the week. And so he needed something, even though it may be a little less heat tolerant, he can put a little bit of water on it and keep it coming back, because to him, safety is crucial. So you don't want kids running on bare ground. Bare ground is hard. When they fall, then that's where injuries come from. So bluegrass is really good if you have areas that you have dogs running around on, even people, traffic, kids. It's a little bit more traffic tolerant than you would say tall fescue is. Now, warm season grasses. Some people like them, some people don't. It's a love-hate relationship, I feel like. There's 3 common species, Bermuda, Buffalo, and Zoysia, that we grow here. The warm season grasses, They grow predominantly in the summer. They go dormant in the winter, and they are brown. And a lot of people don't like them too because sometimes you don't have 100% warm season or 100% cool season. So then you get this mottled look, as you can see like in the picture on the bottom right, especially in the fall. Now, when it comes to wintertime, depending on where you're at in the state, I believe some of the cool season grasses turn just as brown as the warm season grasses. Now, they're still metabolizing a little bit. And as I saw just after this last rainfall we had a lot of green up. We also had a little bit warmer temperatures, but they will go brown in the summertime. So sometimes I don't think that's a valid excuse, but if you do have this, you will see the differences, within those grasses. They are more heat tolerant and they are more drought tolerant. And I could talk hours and hours and hours, but I won't, about why they are. And that's how the mechanisms work inside and how efficient they are inside when it comes to harvesting energy and molecular science of that, but we're not going to get into it. All I need to know is it's more heat tolerant and more drought tolerant. With every good, there's bad. They are not shade tolerant at all. So, perfect example here. These are trees growing up close to it, but will not grow under those trees. Some of the newer varieties that are coming out are more shade tolerant, but they're going to be, because it's thinner light, you're going to have a thinner stand. So if you are trying to grow warm season grasses or any grass under shade, decrease your expectations of what it's going to look like, because in the shade you're going to have a weaker stand, so then you're going to have more weeds, you're going to have more problems with watering, etc. But in sunny locations, they're really, really competitive. And if you have something work done to your yard one day and the next week, it may grow right back in, so they are good. Another drawback is the cold winters. Because we have cold winters, if it doesn't harden off properly, like it tries to prepare itself for winter just like a bear would. It tries to store that energy and then goes to sleep. Where we see winter injury is the spring like this. That plant says, oh, it's warm outside. The soil's getting warm. I need to wake up now. So if it starts to wake up and we have another cold spell, it didn't have time to start that hibernation cycle over again, so then it gets injured. So, but it is, and just in general, it's not as cold tolerant as the cool season grasses. Now, Zoysiagrass is one of the warm season grasses. It both has stolons and rhizomes. It is a stiff, coarse textured grass. It's very spongy, isn't it? And very stiff. Now, that's good in some situations, bad in other situations. If you want kids rolling around on it, maybe it's not the best. I wouldn't say it's the Serta mattress of the grasses, but it does make a good lawn. It works really. Golf course guys love it because it's a heat tolerant grass. The ball sits up on top of it. People can find things. It's very reluctant to traffic. It can also have thatch problems, though. We'll talk about thatch a little bit more and renovate it, or how you renovate it, but we have found no rhyme or reason of why this turf species produces more thatch than the other ones. So just know, with every good, there's bad. With this one, you can, it's very coarse textured, but it fits really well in the state of Kansas. This is it used in a home lawn. Some of the newer varieties that are out there are even darker than the older ones. So they look more like a fescue, or they look more like a bluegrass, but you get the benefit of the zoysiagrasses. It forms very thick lawn. There's two different types of how you grow warm season grasses. You can either grow them by seed, or you can grow them what's called vegetatively. Seed is very simple. You throw the seed out and then it grows, okay? Vegetatively means you either have to sod it, you have to sprig it, or you have to plug it. But let's start with sodding. Sodding is just cutting and laying it down. The reason you have to vegetatively do it, because this is kind of like a clone of itself. During the breeding process and selectivity, it doesn't have viable seeds. So the only way to plant this grass is by growing it from the stolons or the rhizomes, because they can make new grass plants. So sodding is just laying it down. Let's go with plugging next. Plugging is literally just taking a little bit of that grass and planting it every foot. And then you just let it grow in. So it looks like polka dots there for a while, and it will grow in. And it's back-breaking work. Reason people plug is because you don't have to pay for the total amount of sod. You know, one piece of sod can cover 3 or 4 times the square footage as it would if you were just to lay it flat. But you have to take time to grow it in. Sod is instant lawn. And the last one is called sprigging. So you take sod and you put it in a blender and you chop it all up. Now what you've done is you've cut all those rhizomes and stolons. Oops, I'm going the wrong way. You've cut all these rhizomes and stolons right here, you know, chopped them up. Well, that's just a bunch of nodes. And at each node on that rhizome or that stolon, it'll grow a new grass. So it's the idea, you're chopping up vegetative means and dispersing it like seed, and then it grows from it. It looks dead for about 2 weeks. I mean, it looks brown and dead, but then it comes out of it and then grows. That process typically is cheaper, but you definitely have to have a good irrigation because it takes a little bit of water frequently to get it going because you don't want those to dry out. Meyer is the best vegetative variety of zoysiagrass. Now, if you're going to get seeded varieties, Zenith is the best one. When you go from a vegetative to a seeded, you lose some cold tolerance. Because the seeded variety is there, you typically don't have that same cold tolerance as you do with Meyer. I have seen, though, more Zenith the past year go in a lot because everybody's budget's tight. Everybody doesn't have the amount of money to spend on a vegetative variety or sod, so they buy the seed. Thought process is, well, if every 5 years I lost my grass 100% due to a cold winter, it's still cheaper to buy that seed and replant it than it is to buy that sod up front one time. And you're typically not going to have 100% kill of a lawn. Say if you did have, you know, partial areas that died, you can go in and pull chunks out of the other side that's growing and put it in your dead areas, and it'll eventually grow in, and you haven't spent any money, just a little bit of time. But those are two. There's some other ones out there like Yukon, or no, that's Bermudagrass, but Zenith is the best one when it comes to zoysia. Typically used on golf courses, like I said. You can really see, I keep hitting the wrong button. You can really see the kind of color difference as it's growing in the summer. It's more of a golden green than it is of a green. There are some newer varieties out there. This one came from K-State. This is called Chisholm because it was worked with Texas A&M and K-State. Chisholm Trail connects those two together, so they named it Chisholm. It is a really good drought-tolerant, good zoysiagrass tolerant. Really didn't take off, and I believe because the ends frayed a little bit, regardless of how sharp your mower blade was, they still frayed. It had a pretty look to it, but a lot of people didn't like that. And I think that because it was so drought-tolerant and heat-tolerant, it was a thicker leaf, and so it was just tougher to cut. Another one is this one right here that Dr. Fry has worked on. So you know that there's stuff coming through the pipeline. This one is it has all the attributes of Meyer, except it's finer textured. This looks more like a fescue than Meyer does. It is a darker green color, finer textured. It's really nice, as you can tell by the size of that quarter compared to the size of those leaves. This one is not on the market. It's still in production. Right now it's just a number. It's actually growing in 15 states. I'm at producers right now across the United States. The idea behind this was if the producers will grow it and they like it, they'll sell it. And then it's available. Instead of saying, oh, this grass is great and it's all on the market, but you don't have growers growing it for anybody to get it. So it went the opposite route this time with trying to release this grass. The K-State lawyers and the Texas A&M lawyers are, you know, doing all the licensing, that stuff, the legal stuff that I don't know all about. But in the future, and this one's very close to coming out, in the future, this one will be available. This is why I said 10, 15 years is new. I think they've been working on this one for about 10, 15 years already, and so now it's just finally at the brink of being able to come out. So there's a bunch of different names out there. Right now it's just a number, but hopefully they'll find a good name for it. Now, Bermudagrass is more aggressive than Zoysiagrass, but it's not as aggressive as the crazy wild Bermudagrass that I'm pretty sure grows like kudzu. You know, does anybody ever, you know what kudzu is? So there's all these stories behind kudzu. I think the best one is it was either a KU grad or a UNC grad thought that they were going to fix erosion control, and they brought it over and they planted it on all the roadsides and the hills because then, you know, it grows quick and it's easy to maintain, tolerant. But now it's invasive. It's like super fast growing. I mean, they've sprayed herbicides on it. They've tried to feed goats with it. I mean, all sorts of stuff. But it's very aggressive, kudzu weed is. Bermudagrass, your common Bermudagrass that is a weed, is the aggressive one. It's the one that's going to grow fast. Now, these that I'm going to talk about, these hybrid varieties, are not as aggressive, but they're still going to be the most aggressive out of all the turfs out there. It does have stolons and rhizomes. You can do it vegetatively. You can do it by seed as well. The hybrid varieties usually are a little bit slower. And I don't know, that's some anecdotal data. I wouldn't say a little bit. I think that's all management. It depends on how much fertilizer, how much water you give it. Really depends on how fast this species grows. Football field guys love this. Baseball field guys love this. You know, parks love this type of grass. Dog parks, people that manage dog parks, because they can beat it up, rip it up, tear it up, and it grows back in. If I was a professional football field manager and I lived in a climate where I could grow Bermudagrass, I would grow Bermudagrass. Because I got a game plan on Sunday, and my job depends that that field looks tip-top shape by next Sunday type of thing. And so this grass is aggressive enough to grow in and fill those voids. But it's used a lot more places than just athletic fields. I would say it's not really recommended for the north half of Kansas. I like that Highway 70 mark, but it's getting pushed up. And some of these newer varieties are having colder and colder and colder tolerances. I know guys in Nebraska that are growing it. I know guys that are well north of Manhattan that are growing even the seeded varieties. Seeded varieties, you're going to look at Riviera and Yukon are the two that are out there. When it comes to vegetative varieties, you got Patriot, Latitude 36, Northbridge. These two right here, Latitude 36 and Northbridge, is what's in Kauffman Stadium and what's in the Arrowhead Stadium. And they're growing it very well. A lot of other places are putting these in. These two are actually, they've come to find out they're a little bit more cold tolerant than they anticipated. They anticipated it not growing above the Latitude 36 line. That's why the name of it was there. But they found out it tolerates a lot colder temperatures than they first initially. There's not much difference between Latitude and Northbridge. What happened, they both came out of Oklahoma State. They both looked good. It came down to the point to pick one to market and go forward with, but they couldn't pick one. They said, heck with it. We'll just do both of them. So what they've said is Northbridge tends to have a little bit more root mass to it, a little bit stronger than Latitude, but to the naked eye, you can't tell. Now there's midlawn and midfield, which are the older vegetative varieties. These actually came out of K-State. These are going to be a little bit more coarser textured. And I don't know, but maybe one sod grower in the state that's actually growing midlawn. And right now they're not selling it because they're trying to increase their stock before they can sell it. But it can be grown by seed. These are the good varieties. It can also be grown vegetatively by these. We talked about sprigging. This one would be the ideal one to sprig. It works really well sprigging. If you were going to do a vegetative variety, 6 weeks your yard can be grown in. I mean, that's a month and a half. That's really, really good. That's hard to do with seed. Well, it's out there. It is a good grass to be grown, and it's not your common wild Bermudagrass. This is your common aggressive wild Bermudagrass. This is the weed. This, and actually your desired Bermudagrass, is still a weed. you can tell the difference. Maybe I'm just like a nerd and I look at grass, walk around like this all the time. But in the summertime, if this wild aggressive kind is in your regular Bermuda grass, and with the dew on the ground in the morning, you can pick out the differences in the patches that are in it. In the middle of summertime, when it's growing, this is going to be a lighter green. It's going to be thicker. It's real easy to pick those patches. Now, I don't know if that was a bush, a shrub, a kid, or what was under that, but it's very aggressive and hard to control. But I like buffalo grass. I think it's really good. I think it fits very well across the state, more, I'd say, western, southern than eastern, just due to the amount of rainfall. I think it can tolerate those rainfalls, but it is a very, very good grass. Buffalo grass, I kind of think I call it a low maintenance, not a no maintenance grass. A little bit goes a long, long, long way. If you do neglect it, or if you do love it to death, it will die. If you like mowing your yard, don't plant this, because it is not as traffic tolerant. It doesn't like to be over maintained. It doesn't like over watering. It doesn't like over fertilizing. It's a low maintenance, not a no maintenance. The cool thing about buffalo grass is it is the only turf grass species that we grow in home lawns that's native to North America. All the other species are either, or Asia, Africa, European, and those are the climates that they originated from, and now we're trying to grow them in a climate that they're not originated from. So that's why they're difficult to grow. Buffalo grass has been growing way before we tried to put it in our home lawns and grow it. Some people don't like it, though, because it's a lighter green color. It is a thinner canopy. They just don't like that it greens up later and then it goes dormant sooner, so it's only green for a shorter period of time compared to your other turf grass. But it is a good grass species. It does have stolons, so if it is injured, it can recover from those things. The new varieties are very green. They are darker green. The newer varieties are also greening up earlier, and they're staying greener longer. I like to say if you operate buffalo grass on an 80-20, you will get a nice lawn. 20% effort is going to give you 80% benefit of a turf grass. Just a little bit of water, a little bit of fertilizer. Don't over-maintain it. Just control the weeds a little bit, and you're good. But over-maintaining can hurt this type of grass. Now, this is an interesting fact when it comes to buffalo grass. Everybody thinks that the thing that sits above the grass is the seed, and it's actually not the seed. It's the male flower. So if we go back to that first picture, those white things are the male flower. That's not the seed. Some people like it, some people don't. I personally like it because I think it gives a very native prairie look to it. If you don't like it, you can put a vegetative variety in. But the female flower, as you can see in the bottom left, is the one that has the seed. And it's a seed pod. It looks like this round ball with a crown on top, and then there's 2 seeds in it. All the other grass species, the seeds are above the canopy. This grass species, the seed is in the canopy. This is one of the reasons why the seed is more expensive. Because if you go harvest fescue, any of those other grasses, it's just like combining wheat. Your seed's up top. You have a separation of foliage and seed. It's easy to cut it, harvest it, and clean it. With this, you got to get down in the canopy, collect the seeds, which one is going to be less efficient doing. And then once you get it, it's got a lot of trash with it. So now you got to pay somebody an extra step to clean it before you can sell it. So that's why buffalo grass seed is typically a little bit more expensive. But your seeding rate is lower than it is with your fescues, therefore your rate per acre is roughly going to be the same. Now, if you have the vegetative varieties of buffalo grass, like we talked about the Bermuda and the Zoysia, then you're not typically going to see this male flower, not as much. Your seeded varieties will have the male flower. But with buffalo grass, it doesn't hold together really well, so you're not going to get sod. You're either going to plug it or seed it. And sprigging it, I don't think has ever even been attempted because it only has stolons. It doesn't have stolons and rhizomes, so it would take a lot of sod to produce sprigs, so you might as well just seed it. There are, like I said, there are both seeded and vegetative varieties. There are a bunch of different seeded varieties out there. Sharp's Improved 2, Tatanka, Cody, Sharpshooter. Sundancer is a brand new one that came out of Nebraska that's supposed to be a darker color, which I have a picture of it. None of them are not a bad variety, though. You know, you have Bowie. There's going to be some of these that say, well, this is an older variety. They're not bad, though. They're actually pretty good across the board. I wouldn't say that, you know, when we do the tests of the different varieties, there's not one that's just horrible. They all perform pretty well. Some of them typically are a little bit darker. Now, when you get to Legacy, Prestige, and 609, you also increase the dark color with it as well, but you can't seed it. So there's other ones out there. One of the biggest, another thing, one of the biggest misconceptions of Buffalograss, they say it doesn't resist weeds very well. That is not true. It's because the management of the Buffalograss is why you have weeds. Management of any turf is why you have weeds, not because you have a turf species is why you get weeds. It is typically a thinner canopy, but if you are fertilizing and water properly, you're not going to have the amount of weeds in there that you say that you would. And a lot of times with Buffalograss, people say it doesn't resist weeds very well because Buffalograss is a different color. And so it's easier to see weeds, a different color transition than it is when a green on green. And we did kind of a little study with that. I'll show you kind of some of the pictures too to that. And it was the same amount of weeds, but there was just a perception that there was more weeds in one than another plot. This is typically up here on the top left. I wish I'd have had that. That's the big one. That is Buffalograss. That is the new Sundancer variety. See how darker it is compared to some of the other species. That was fertilized a little bit. So you got a little bit darker color. And it is probably just as fast or faster growing than Zoysiagrass. It is, they say it's slow growing, but I think it's just as fast or a little bit faster than Zoysia as well. Here's just another picture of the seed or the male flowers on top of it. I think that is a very thick stand. You know, when it comes to Buffalograss, it makes a perfect lawn. It's not very shade tolerant. Someone tell me that it is very shade tolerant. They planted it under the tree. It grew and looked great. Well, that was the first year. You know, give it a little bit of time. It's going to thin itself out type of thing. But it will tolerate a little bit, but not very much. It's kind of like your Bermudagrass. So I like this picture because if it can grow in a crack of concrete, we should be able to grow it in our lawns, you know. And this was actually even in Colorado too. So it was out of an environment that it would typically grow in. A little bit goes a long way. This is a perfect example right here of what a little bit does when it comes to water. Dormant Buffalograss here, green growing Buffalograss there, dormant Buffalograss in the back. You can see there is a hose that runs through the middle, but that hose is not to water the grass. That hose was leaking because it was watering trees on the other side of the park. So just the leak in the hose kept it out of dormancy in the summertime and kept it actively growing. This is one of those things, look at the weeds here in the front part of it compared to the weeds in the middle. The perception of green on green is harder to tell with the naked eye than it is from brown on green. This is unacceptable weeds in a dormant lawn. This is an acceptable amount of weeds in a actively growing lawn. And a lot of times it's perception and not actually numbers with it. So with Buffalo, you're going to save water one because it's low water use, but if you water it just enough to keep it out of dormancy, you're going to have a healthy growing grass that's now going to outcompete weeds. In Grinnell, Kansas, there is a 9-hole golf course called Cow Patty Ranch. It has 18 irrigation heads, one on each green and one on each tee, and that's for their ryegrass. They do rye out there. But the rest of the entire course is Buffalograss. And the way the course is set up, there's a main irrigation line that goes across every fairway. There's a quick coupler, and they have a water wheel. 18 days he waters his fairways. You say 18 days. Well, he waters one half a fairway one night. He flips it around, does the other half the next night. So it takes 2 days to do one fairway. You got 9 fairways. In 18 days, and then he doesn't do it for a month. He just wants to keep it out of dormancy and growing. And it doesn't take a lot. So it's really, really good grass, very drought tolerant. I think it works really well. I would put it in my yard, but I have complete shade in my backyard. So I'm not able to put it in. That's really all I had. This is what we're going to do after. We're going to take a little break.